My name is Laurel Hayes, and the night everything in my life finally cracked open was the night I turned 34. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that the humiliation served to me at that restaurant wasn't the climax. It was only the spark. The explosion came later after years of being drained financially, emotionally, and spiritually by the very people who swore they loved me. But let me take you to the beginning, to the moment I realized my family never saw me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as an asset. The Harbor Lantern was one of those coastal restaurants meant for special occasions. Battered wood railings, warm lights strung across the patio, soft jazz rolling out from speakers overhead. It should have been a lovely place to celebrate a birthday, but the atmosphere that night felt off from the moment I arrived. My older brother Grant greeted me with a smile too tight. My mother complimented my dress with a tone that implied I was trying too hard. And my younger sister Elise, well, she didn't look at me at all. I should have known something was wrong. Dinner dragged. Every comment from Elise felt like a pinprick. Every sigh from my mother felt like disappointment aimed squarely at me. And Grant, normally the peacekeeper, kept pressing me with odd questions about my job, my savings, my home. Questions he'd never cared about before. But the breaking point came after dessert. After the waiter set down a slice of cheesecake with a single candle. After someone half-heartedly sang, I leaned back in my chair, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. And that was when Elise's son, little Finn, only 8, but already parroting his parents, grabbed my purse from the empty chair beside me. It happened fast. He sprinted toward the railing overlooking the black waves. I froze, confusion catching in my throat. When he reached the edge, he turned back with a grin far too familiar. Elise's grin. Cruel, entitled. Mom says you don't deserve anything you didn't pay for. And with that, he threw my purse over the railing. The splash echoed through the night. Grant laughed first. Elise followed. My mother pressed her napkin to her mouth to hide a smile. No one corrected the child. No one apologized. No one even looked at me except with the expectation that I would laugh it off. I didn't. Riley, my daughter. My heartbeat slipped her small hand into mine under the table. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. She was watching, learning. She was seeing how her mother allowed herself to be treated. And in that split second, something inside me shifted. I stood up, thanked the waiter, and walked out. No scene, no shouting, just silence. A silence so sharp it sliced clean through years of manipulation. But the real shift, the irreversible one, came later after Riley fell asleep in the back seat, her breath soft and steady. I sat in the dark driveway, phone glowing in my hand, and opened my banking app. There they were. The auto payments I'd been covering for Elise and Grant, the overdue mortgage for their failing house, the private tutoring for Elise's son, the credit card bill they swore they'd pay back, the temporary car loan I had taken out for my mother. Thousands upon thousands of dollars bleeding out of my life month after month. I had told myself it was temporary. Family helps family. They'll get back on their feet. But staring at the cold numbers, something hardened in me. By 1:12 in the morning, I clicked cancel on every single payment. No more safety net, no more excuses, no more pretending I wasn't being exploited. The next morning, Elise's SUV was repossessed. Grant's mortgage hit default. My mother's credit card froze. And they had absolutely no idea why. If I had known how far they would go next, what they would do to claw back control, I might have prepared differently. I might have locked every door earlier, documented every call sooner, or protected Riley with measures I didn't yet know I would need. Because the night my purse hit the water wasn't the darkest moment. The morning after the repossessions, the house felt unusually still. Even the refrigerator hum sounded louder, as if the universe itself was leaning in to listen. Riley was eating cereal at the table, her little feet swinging under the chair, unaware of the storm I knew was forming on the other side of my phone. The first call came at 6:42. Elise. Then at 6:43. Grant. Then my mother. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails came next, shaky at first, confused, then sharpening with the tone I knew too well. The tone that implied I had broken some unwritten contract. The tone that treated my financial support as an obligation, not a choice. Finally, Elise texted, "Did you know the SUV is gone? Something happened with the payment, you need to call them. You, not her." Minutes later, "Laurel, I can't drive Finn to school. Fix this." Fix this. 2 words I had lived under for most of my adult life. But I didn't respond. Instead, I made coffee, packed Riley's lunch, and drove her to school with a calmness she hadn't seen in years. When she got out of the car, she hesitated, looked back, and asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" I nodded. I'm finally getting there. But somewhere around mid-morning, the silence turned into something else, panic morphing into anger. Grant's next message wasn't a request, it was a command. "Call me now. The bank says you stopped the transfer. That house goes into foreclosure in weeks." Foreclosure, a word he had treated as my problem for years. Then another. "Are you punishing us? What is wrong with you?" I stared at the screen, stunned by the audacity. I was the one paying his bills. I was the one keeping his household standing. And somehow cutting off the pipeline turned me into the villain. But I still didn't answer. Around noon, my mother finally left a voicemail. Her voice was soft, practiced, coded in the emotional manipulation she'd refined for decades. "Laurel, honey, your brother and sister are very upset. Things are difficult for them right now. You know how much they depend on you. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Call me so we can smooth this over." Smooth this over, meaning pretend nothing happened, meaning return to obedience. But something inside me had already crossed a threshold, a place my family had never expected me to reach. By late afternoon, my silence was no longer merely inconvenient, it was provoking them. And in families like mine, provocation always leads to escalation. That evening, while preparing dinner, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart tightened. They had come to my house. I peeked through the side window. Elisa's husband, Mason, stood in the driveway, his expression twisted with frustration. When I didn't answer the door, he pounded harder. "Laurel, we need to talk. Open up." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He pounded again. "You can't just cut people off. You don't get to do that." But he was wrong. I did, and I already had. The pounding stopped only when my neighbor stepped outside and glared at him. He drove off, tires screeching. And I realized something I hadn't understood fully until that moment. They weren't just angry, they were desperate. And desperate people don't think clearly. 3 days passed before the next escalation. I walked Riley outside on a cool morning, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She climbed into the car, humming while I loaded her lunchbox. Everything was normal until I rounded the back of the vehicle. My breath caught. A scratch, long, jagged, deliberate, ran across the rear panel. Not a key swipe, not a random scrape. A message. My hands trembled as I touched the line carved into the paint. Red dust from the primer smeared onto my fingertip. Whoever did it wanted me to see it, wanted me to feel it. Riley leaned out the window. "Mom, what's wrong?" I forced a smile so thin it nearly cracked. "Nothing, sweetheart. Go ahead and buckle up." I drove her to school, kissed her goodbye, waited for her to disappear into the building, then sat alone in the car with my pulse pounding in my ears. It didn't take a genius to know who had done it, or why. I had cut the cord they depended on. Money is oxygen to some people. When you take it away, they gasp, claw, lash out. But scratching my car was just the beginning. That evening, after Riley fell asleep, my phone buzzed with an email from her school. I expected a schedule update or a fundraiser announcement. Instead, the message made my stomach drop. "Hello, Ms. Hayes. We received a phone call today from someone claiming to be you, requesting details about Riley's daily schedule. We asked verification questions, but the caller was unable to answer. We denied the request. We wanted to inform you immediately." I read it twice, then again, then again. Someone had tried to access my daughter's information. My daughter. This was no longer about money. This was about control. About punishment. About dragging me back into submission through the one place they knew I was vulnerable. My hands shook as I printed the email. I placed it beside the photos of the car scratch and beside old bank statements showing years of temporary help that never ended. A pattern was forming, one even the police couldn't ignore. But I wasn't ready to go to them yet, not until I understood the full shape of what my family was becoming. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside felt like footsteps. Every creak inside the house felt like someone watching. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, understanding something with a clarity that chilled me. They weren't falling apart. They were retaliating. And retaliation has no limit when entitlement is threatened. The decision to go to the police wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a burst of anger or a moment of triumph. It came with exhaustion, a deep, bone-tired recognition that the situation had passed the point of family conflict. This was harassment, escalation, and potentially danger. The next morning, I gathered everything: photographs, emails, voicemails, bank records. I placed them in a folder thick enough to slap when it closed. I dropped Riley at school and drove straight to the precinct. The station was quiet, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. An officer named Martinez listened as I explained, not with hysteria, not with theatrics, but with clarity born from years of surviving subtle cruelty. He took notes. His brow tightened when he saw the school email, hardened when he saw the photos of my car. By the time he got to the financial records, his jaw was clenched. "This isn't just family drama," he said. "This is a pattern of coercion and targeted harassment." Hearing someone else name it felt like a door opening inside me. For so long, I had normalized the mistreatment, softened it, excused it. But here, under the cold lights of a police station, it finally became what it truly was: wrong, unacceptable, actionable. Martinez filed an official report. He recommended documenting everything going forward and warned that people who lose control sometimes escalate more aggressively before stopping. I already knew that. On the drive home, I felt a strange lightness. Not relief, no, not yet, but clarity. A sharpness. A readiness. And it arrived just in time. Because that evening, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees and painted orange stripes across the living room floor, my mother showed up at my door. Not to apologize, not to understand, not to ask if her granddaughter was safe. She came to deliver a message. "You didn't have to do this, Laurel," she said, her voice cold and unfamiliar. "You made things much worse than they needed to be." Worse for who I wanted to ask. But I already knew the answer. Worse for the people who had been exploiting me for years. Worse for the people who believed my boundaries were cruelty. Worse for the people who thought I would never fight back. My mother's eyes flickered, searching for the old me, the obedient daughter. She didn't find her. Instead, she found someone new, someone dangerous, someone awakened. I shut the door slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. The war had begun. 3 days passed after my mother's cold visit. 3 days of silence that felt less like peace and more like the quiet before a building collapses. My family had always preferred chaos to accountability. Silence meant plotting. On the fourth morning, I learned exactly what they had been plotting. A thick envelope lay on my doorstep, no return address. My name written in a handwriting I knew too well, Elise's. Inside was a printed spreadsheet. Dozens of lines, dates, dollar amounts, notes scribbled in the margins, rent, utilities, school fees, credit card minimums. It was a record, not of what I had paid for them, but what they claimed I owed them. At the bottom, in Elise's sharp handwriting, "You've had more advantages than any of us. It's time you stop pretending you're the victim. We're done being used." I stared at the page, stunned by the inversion of reality. Used, I had funded half their lives. I had covered their emergencies, their luxuries, their mismanagement. Yet here they were rewriting history to make themselves the ones betrayed. But the worst part wasn't the letter. It was the document clipped behind it. A drafted complaint. A threat of a civil lawsuit. They were planning to sue me. Not to win, no lawyer on earth would accept their delusion, but to intimidate me. To drain me into submission. To punish me for taking back control of my own finances. I sat on the floor, the papers trembling in my hands. For the first time, fear slid into my chest. Not fear of losing, but fear of what they were becoming. Their desperation had mutated. They were no longer reaching for money. They were reaching for my life. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. Instead, something colder settled inside me: clarity. I gathered the papers, slipped them into the evidence folder, and whispered to myself, "If they want a war, I'll give them one. But on my terms." That night, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Karina Wells, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a voice steady enough to quiet thunder. When I explained my situation, she didn't blink. She simply asked, "How long have they been exploiting you?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. The boundary between helping and servitude had blurred years ago. Karina nodded. "We'll start by reclaiming the narrative. If they escalate, we escalate legally. And Laurel, you don't have to be afraid anymore." For the first time in years, I believed that might be true. The next escalation didn't come from Elise or Grant. It came from the bank. Around 11:30 the next morning, I received a call. The representative's voice was polite but strained. "Ms. Hayes, we're contacting you regarding some unusual activity. Someone attempted to access your account information using partial credentials." I went still. Who attempted it, I asked, though I already knew. We can't disclose that, but the verification answers did not match our records. We flagged it and locked the attempt. My heart beat hard enough to shake my ribs. First my purse, then my car, then Riley's school, now my bank account. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was encroachment, violation, a step toward identity theft. That evening, I added the bank alert to my evidence folder. The stack was becoming thick enough to bend the metal clips, and yet every page only made my resolve sharper. Karina called later. I've reviewed everything. We're filing a protective petition and documentation request. They don't control the narrative now, we do. I exhaled shakily. The fear was still there, but it now had edges shape a place to sit instead of devouring me whole. Late that night, after Riley fell asleep, I did something I had avoided for years. I pulled out the old text messages from Elise and Grant. Messages dripping with entitlement. Patterns so clear I couldn't believe I'd missed them. One message from Elise hit harder than the rest. Laurel, you know you make more than us. The least you can do is help. Don't be selfish. Selfish! For wanting to keep my own money, for wanting safety, for wanting dignity. The word that once pierced me now sounded laughable. I realized something then, something nobody in my family ever wanted me to understand. When people rely on your silence, your voice becomes dangerous. And when people benefit from your weakness, your strength becomes a threat. I was becoming a threat, and they felt it. It happened on a Thursday night. A strange scraping sound outside woke me around 1 in the morning. Not loud, not violent, just steady enough to rattle the edges of my nerves. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window. A figure stood near my fence. Small, hooded, holding something against the wood. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding. Before I could dial, the figure bolted, running toward the street shoes slapping against pavement. I ran outside with the porch light on. Car lights flashed at the corner. A vehicle sped away. I turned to the fence. Across one panel, in crude, angry strokes, someone had carved, "Thief!" My breath left my body in a single sharp burst. Thief. That was how far their delusion had gone. They had taken so much from me. Time, money, safety, and now they were rewriting themselves as victims, me as the aggressor. Rage flared, not hot but cold and clean. The kind of anger that doesn't burn, it focuses. I photographed the fence, the tool marks, the tire tracks, the footprints in the dirt. I saved everything. The next morning, I submitted the footage to Officer Martinez, who examined it carefully. This is escalating. You need to be prepared, Laurel. People who feel entitled to your resources will justify anything to reclaim them. I know, I said quietly, and I meant it. At work, I could barely focus. My hands trembled every time I thought of the word carved into my fence. Yet beneath the fear, something stronger pulsed. Resolve. I wasn't backing down. Not now, not after everything they'd done. That night, I checked every lock twice, then 3 times. I sat at the dining table surrounded by evidence photographs, statements, screenshots, printed messages, financial history. Riley peeked out of her room. Mom, is everything okay? I forced a gentle smile. Everything is changing, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay. She studied me with wise eyes far older than her years. And softly she said, I'm glad you're not letting them hurt you anymore. Her words steadied something deep in me. I was doing this for her. For us. For the future they kept draining. And I hadn't even played my strongest card yet. Saturday morning arrived with a strange sense of energy, like static before lightning. I opened the door to find another envelope. This one from Karina. Inside was a summary of what she'd uncovered. Years of financial manipulation. Patterns of coercion. Attempts at identity theft. Potential child endangerment through the school intrusion. Property damage, harassment, stalking behavior. But the last page was the moment the chessboard flipped. Karina had pulled property tax records from my mother's house, something my family never expected anyone to examine. And there it was, in black and white. Years ago, quietly, secretly, my mother had transferred partial ownership of her home to Elise and Grant by listing my income as supportive collateral, without my knowledge, without consent, using my name. Using my financial stability as the backbone of a home I did not live in and did not benefit from. It was illegal, it was fraudulent, and it was the leverage I never knew I had. I felt the shift, the turn, the moment where the hunted stops running, the moment the tables finally begin to turn. Karina called minutes later. Laurel. This isn't just a defense anymore. This is offense. If they push you again, we pursue charges: fraud, unauthorized use of identity, coercion, and endangerment. You hold the stronger hand. For a long breath, I said nothing. Then, let's prepare everything. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. Because now the playing field was different. For years, they had taken from me because they believed I was harmless. For months, they escalated because they believed I was cornered. But they forgot something. People who push you to the edge never expect you to grow wings. And I was about to fly. The Monday after Karina uncovered the fraudulent property documents felt different from any morning I'd lived in years. There was a strange steadiness inside me, like the ground had finally stopped shifting. For so long, I had been walking on eggshells, shaped by my family's expectations, tiptoeing around their moods, their demands, their storms. But now the ground beneath me felt solid. Not because the danger had passed, but because the truth was finally in my hands. By 8 in the morning, Karina had already emailed me a scanned copy of the property transfer document with a simple message: "They committed a felony, you didn't." I stared at those words, letting them sink into the places where guilt had made a permanent home. It's astonishing how guilt can live inside you even when you've done nothing wrong. My family had fed it to me for so long, like medicine to keep me obedient, that I forgot to question it. Until now. I spent most of the morning flipping through the folder of evidence spread across my dining table. Every page screamed a story. I'd been too blind to see the auto payments, the credit card statements, the scratched car, the school intrusion, the threatening letters, the harassment, and now the fraudulent use of my name to secure property. At 11:20, my phone began to buzz, and buzz, and buzz. Grant, then Elise, then Grant again. 3 calls within 10 minutes. They somehow knew something had shifted. I didn't answer. At 11:35, a text from my mother arrived. "We need to meet, today. Your actions have gone too far. We will not let you destroy this family." Destroy this family. That phrase, those words, it took the air from my lungs for a moment. They had rewritten the narrative so completely that in their minds I was the villain, not them. Not the people who used me, drained me, broke into my life, carved into my fence, tried to access Riley's school records. Me. My hands tightened around the table edge and I whispered to myself, "No more." At 2 in the afternoon, Karina called. She sounded calm, collected, but there was a sharpness in her tone. I spoke with a colleague who specializes in property fraud. "Laurel, this isn't small. What they did carries serious penalties. You're in a position of strength. They're not." I swallowed. "So what happens now?" "That depends on what they do next," she said. "If they continue harassing you, we escalate to criminal charges. If they attempt contact again, especially if it involves Riley, we can request a restraining order immediately." Hearing those words out loud made the situation real in a way the documents couldn't. This wasn't drama. This wasn't family dysfunction. This was a legal battlefield. And for the first time, I wasn't stepping onto it alone. After the call, I sat outside on the porch steps, letting the sun warm my shoulders. The old me, the one who flinched at confrontation, the one who swallowed every insult, the one who bent until she nearly broke, felt like a ghost sitting beside me. But the new me, she was different. She saw the truth clearly. She understood the stakes, and she knew exactly who she was protecting: Riley. As I stood to go back inside, a white SUV rounded the corner and slowed outside my driveway. My stomach dropped. It was Elise's. Even from a distance, I could see her silhouette, rigid, coiled, simmering with the fury of someone who had lost control. She didn't stop, she didn't yell, she just drove by, staring at me. A warning, a threat, a reminder that the storm wasn't over. I didn't respond. I didn't give her the satisfaction of flinching. I simply stepped back into my house and locked the door. At 5:15 that evening, Officer Martinez called. "We've pulled preliminary info on the carving incident. Your neighbors reported seeing a vehicle matching your sister's late last night. They didn't get plates, but it's enough to support a harassment escalation if you choose." I felt my pulse pound in my neck. Elise had crossed the line I feared most. She was now acting openly, not hiding in the shadows. "Document everything," he said. "And Laurel, you're doing the right thing." After the call, I finally let myself sag against the kitchen counter. Fear and relief battled for space in my chest. But beneath them both was something steadier, a sense of inevitability. Everything was converging. The evidence, the threats, the unraveling lies, the growing legal case. My family thought they were tightening the noose around me, but they didn't realize the rope they pulled was looped around themselves. At 8 o'clock, as I tucked Riley into bed, she looked up at me with concern. "Mom, why are they so mad at you?" I brushed her hair gently. "Because sometimes people get angry when the person they depend on sets a boundary. But boundaries aren't bad." "No," I said softly, "they're not." She frowned thoughtfully. "Then why don't they just stop?" I kissed her forehead. "Because some people can't see past what they want." After she fell asleep, I returned to the dining table and stared at the mountain of evidence. Everything was almost ready, almost aligned, almost at the point where there would be no return. And then, almost as if summoned by the tension in the air, my phone buzzed with one final message. From an unknown number: "You're going to regret this, we're not done." A chill slid down my spine. But unlike before, I didn't feel fear. I felt certainty. Because the truth was simple. They weren't done. And neither was I. The morning after the anonymous threat felt deceptively calm, the kind of stillness that settles before a hurricane makes landfall. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin gold stripes, warming the floorboards, but the heaviness in my chest warned me the day would not stay gentle for long. I could feel it building pressure, gathering in a place I could not see yet. By 8:20, after dropping Riley off at school, I opened my email and found a new message from Karina. The subject line alone tightened my stomach. "Urgent. They made their move." I clicked. Inside was a scanned image of a formal complaint filed by Elise and Grant, claiming I had willfully disrupted agreed-upon family financial arrangements, resulting in avoidable hardship and demanding restitution. Restitution. For cutting off the money I never owed them. The absurdity was so total I almost laughed. But beneath the absurdity was something sharper: strategy. They weren't filing to win. They were filing to intimidate me, drain my resources, force my hand. They wanted to bury me in legal noise until I buckled. Karina's follow-up note read, "Don't panic, they made a mistake, a big one." I reread that line 3 times. I called her immediately. "They filed without counsel," she explained, voice cool and steady. "No lawyer attached, and they submitted false statements. We can file a motion to dismiss, but more importantly, this gives us grounds to escalate your harassment case. They've documented their own manipulation." I closed my eyes, letting the information settle. "So this helps us." "Immensely," she said. "They just handed us evidence of malicious intent." For the first time in days, a burst of air escaped my chest in something like relief. Not joy, this situation was far from joyful, but a loosening of the tension that had been cinched tight around me. But the day wasn't finished unraveling. At 12:40, Officer Martinez called. "Laurel, are you home right now?" "Just got in," I said. "Why?" "There's something you need to know." I braced myself, fingers gripping the countertop. "We received a complaint this morning," he continued. "Your siblings filed a statement claiming you threatened them. They're trying to preemptively frame the conflict." My pulse spiked. "Threaten them? I haven't even spoken to them." "I know," he said. "And based on the timeline, your evidence folder disproves their claim immediately." "But Laurel, their behavior is spiraling. You need to understand what this means." "It means desperation," I whispered. "Yes, and desperation can be dangerous." After hanging up, I stood alone in the kitchen, letting the truth settle like dust in a sunbeam. My family was no longer stumbling into mistakes, they were manufacturing narratives, they were weaponizing lies. And each lie pulled them deeper into a hole they were too arrogant to see. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. I froze, heart thudding, hands curling into fists. I peeked out the window. A silver sedan. Not Elise, not Grant, not my mother. 2 strangers stepped out, one holding a clipboard, the other wearing a badge. Process servers. I felt my heartbeat slow, not out of fear, but out of clarity. This was the next move, the next step in their attempt to overwhelm me. I opened the door before they could knock. "Laurel Hayes," one asked. "Yes." They handed me an envelope, nodded politely, and walked away. I closed and locked the door, then opened the envelope with steady hands. It was the same complaint Karina had emailed me, now served formally. Pages of accusations written with Elise's signature: arrogance, claiming emotional distress, financial dependency, familial obligation. They had even attached a handwritten note at the end. "You brought this on yourself. Fix this before it gets worse." A chill traced the back of my neck, not because of the threat, but because of how hollow it sounded now that I knew the truth. They had no leverage left, no legal ground to stand on, no moral justification for their behavior. They were swinging blindly, and every swing landed harder against themselves than me. I scanned their signatures, their statements, their fabricated grievances. Karina would dismantle this document like tissue paper. The judge would see through every lie. Their attempt to trap me was now ammunition for my case. Still, one thing gnawed at me: the intensity of their unraveling. What would they do next when they realized the legal system couldn't be manipulated the way they manipulated me? The answer came sooner than expected. At 6:30 that evening, my neighbor Mrs. Dalton knocked on my door. She was a widow in her 70s with sharp eyes and a softer voice. "Laurel, dear," she said, "I'm not trying to pry, but I thought you should know. Earlier today, I saw your sister arguing with someone in front of your house. They were pointing at your door, at your windows. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough to worry." "What did you hear?" I asked, dread tightening in my chest. She hesitated. "Your sister said something like, 'She won't last. She thinks she can fight us. She has no idea what's coming.'" For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. She touched my arm gently. "Sweetheart, I don't know what's happening, but you and your daughter need to be careful." I swallowed hard. "I am, I promise." After she left, I locked every door, closed every curtain, checked on Riley twice. The house felt smaller, darker, watched. But beneath the tension was a pulsing truth. This wasn't my downfall, it was theirs. They just didn't know it yet. Later that night, as I documented the served complaint and Mrs. Dalton's report, a thought settled cold and certain inside me. My family wasn't just trying to intimidate me. They believed they could destroy me, but they had misunderstood something fundamental. Once a quiet woman learns the truth about her own power, she becomes unstoppable. And I wasn't the same Laurel they grew up manipulating. I was someone new, someone dangerous, someone awake. The court date arrived faster than I expected. It was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 9 sharp, an emergency hearing to address the harassment complaint, the fraudulent filings, and the absurd civil suit Elise and Grant had submitted. I hadn't slept much the night before, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the only way forward was down, but also knowing that somewhere beneath the fall wings were waiting. When Riley left for school, she hugged me tighter than usual. "You'll be okay, Mom," she whispered. "You're stronger than they think." Her words chased me all the way to the courthouse. Karina waited for me at the front steps, sleek gray suit, a folder under her arm, and an expression that could slice steel. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. "Let's finish this." Inside the courtroom, light filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust in the air like glitter suspended in time. Elise and Grant sat on the left side with my mother between them, 3 faces carved from anger and self-righteousness. Elise's jaw was clenched so tightly, her cheek twitched. Grant refused to look at me. My mother's expression was one I'd seen 1,000 times, disappointment sharpened into judgment. But there was something else there, too. Fear. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My pulse thudded in my ears as the hearing began. Karina stood straight. "Your Honor, my client has been subjected to months of targeted harassment, property damage, identity-related intrusion, fraudulent use of her information, and manipulative financial exploitation by her family members." She handed over our evidence packet, an inch-thick collection of documents, photographs, recordings, and transcripts. Elise let out a dramatic scoff. "Manipulative? She's the manipulative one. She cut us off on purpose to ruin our lives." Karina didn't even blink. "Your Honor, may I remind the respondents that emotional outbursts do not replace legal arguments." I watched Elise's face flush, her lips tightening. Grant stood abruptly. "We are her family. Families support each other. She agreed to help us." "Did she?" Karina interrupted smoothly. "Because we have 0 written agreements, 0 verbal agreements recorded, and extensive evidence showing coerced financial dependency. This wasn't support. It was exploitation." The judge turned to Elise and Grant. "You filed a civil complaint stating she owed you restitution. On what basis?" Elise lifted her chin, defiance burning. "On the basis that she's always paid for things. That's our arrangement." The judge's expression remained neutral. "Is there any documentation, any contract, any proof of such an arrangement?" "No, but—" "Then it is not an arrangement. It is a pattern of expectation." Elise faltered. Grant's voice cracked. "She abandoned us." Karina stepped forward. "She stopped paying your bills. That is not abandonment. That is autonomy." A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Karina pulled out the property records. Your Honor. We also need to address a more serious matter. The respondents used Ms. Hayes's income and personal information without her knowledge or consent to secure partial ownership of their mother's property. This constitutes fraud. The judge stiffened. Do you have proof? Karina handed him the documents, signed, filed, and matched with our client's financial history. My mother turned pale. Elise's eyes widened. Grant went rigid. The judge read silently for several long moments. The tension in the room tightened like a rope. Then he spoke. This is highly concerning. If these allegations are accurate, this may result in criminal charges. At minimum, it invalidates the supporting document in their civil claim. My mother suddenly stood, voice trembling. She said we could use her information. She told me years ago. I spoke for the first time. No, Mom, I didn't. She froze. The entire courtroom did. Her eyes darted, searching for the version of me she used to control the daughter who would fold under pressure. But she couldn't find her. The judge continued. Given the evidence, I am issuing a temporary protection order on behalf of Ms. Hayes and her daughter. Respondents are prohibited from contacting her directly or indirectly. Additionally, the civil filing is dismissed as baseless and retaliatory. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling across a valley. Dismissed, retaliatory, protection order. Elise's face twisted with fury. This is insane. She ruined our lives. You ruined your own, the judge said firmly. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit wood with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. Everything dissolved into movement. Papers shuffled. People stood. A bailiff approached Elise and Grant to explain the terms of the protection order. Karina placed a steady hand on my shoulder, guiding me out. But as we reached the hallway, a voice cut through the noise. Laurel. I turned. My mother stood a few feet away, her expression a puzzle of anger and heartbreak. How could you do this to us? My answer came colder than I expected. You taught me to take responsibility for my actions, I said. Maybe it's time you learned the same. Her mouth trembled, but she said nothing. I walked past her, each step feeling lighter than the last. Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face like a benediction. The sky looked clearer. The air smelled cleaner. The world seemed wider. Karina exhaled. You did it. But I shook my head. No, I said quietly. This was just the reckoning. The healing comes after. Because even though the law had finally recognized what my family refused to, the battle wasn't just legal. It was emotional, internal, a lifetime in the making, and healing from that was going to be its own war. The days following the court hearing felt unreal, like waking from a nightmare, only to discover sunlight waiting outside the window. Not blinding, not overwhelming, just warm enough to remind me I was alive, safe, free. For the first time in years, my phone didn't vibrate with demands. No missed calls from Elise, no guilt-laced messages from my mother, no shouting voicemails from Grant. Silence. Not the dangerous silence from before. A peaceful one. A reclaimed one. The protection order had been served within 24 hours. Elise and Grant tried to protest, but the officers sent to deliver the paperwork were unmoved. My family's favorite weapon, pressure, had been stripped away. But even with the legal walls around me, the emotional weight lingered. Years of conditioning don't evaporate just because a judge signs a paper. There were moments when I caught myself listening for the sound of an incoming text. Moments when I instinctively checked the driveway. Moments when the old fear resurfaced like muscle memory. Healing isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, and I was slowly ascending. On the Saturday after the hearing, I took Riley for a long walk along the coastal trail. The ocean roared in slow breaths beside us. She skipped ahead, arms out like wings, hair whipping in the wind. Watching her, I realized how much of her childhood had been shadowed by my family's demands. She had seen more hurt than she deserved, not because of her own choices, but because of mine. Not my mistakes, my silence. We reached a bench overlooking the water, and she climbed onto it, legs dangling. Mom, are they really not allowed to bother us anymore? That's right, I said. They won't be bothering us again. She nodded thoughtfully. Good, you're happier now. Her simple observation pierced me deeper than any insult Elise had ever thrown. Children see truth clearly, painfully, purely. On the walk home, my phone buzzed a notification from my attorney. Final documentation filed. Civil case dismissed permanently. Fraud case pending further review. You're protected. I exhaled long and slow. Later that evening, after putting Riley to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the last streaks of pink fade from the sky. The breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the garden. The world felt quiet, grounded. Then came the twist I didn't expect. My mother. She approached slowly down the sidewalk steps, measured, not storming like before. No fury, no entitlement, just something raw. She stopped at the base of my porch steps. "Laurel," she said, voice soft but strained. I held my mug tightly. "You can't be here, there's an order." "I know," she whispered. "I just needed to say something before I go." My breath caught, not from fear, but from the heaviness of years untangled. She looked older than I remembered. Her shoulders sloped. Her eyes carried something unfamiliar, remorse, or the beginning of it. "I didn't see what was happening," she said. "Or maybe I refused to. I thought keeping peace meant keeping you quiet. I thought helping your brother and sister meant pushing you to give more. I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought you were strong enough to carry everything." Her voice cracked on the last word. For a long moment I said nothing, because the truth is, she wasn't entirely wrong. I was strong. But strength is not the same as invincibility. Finally I spoke. "Mom, this didn't happen because I wasn't strong enough. It happened because I didn't believe I was allowed to say no." She nodded, slowly, tears forming. "I'm sorry, Laurel, for all of it. And I know you may never want a relationship with me again." I looked at her, the woman who raised me, who failed me, who loved me imperfectly, who hurt me deeply. Forgiveness wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't simple, but it didn't have to be. "I need time," I said softly, "and space." She nodded again, wiped her cheek, turned, and walked away. No drama, no shouting, no guilt, just an ending. Or the beginning of a different story, one not yet written. After she disappeared down the street, I sat alone with the fading light and listened to my own breath. Slow, calm, steady. For the first time in my life, I felt wholly undeniably mine. Not someone's provider, not someone's buffer, not someone's emotional punching bag, not the family bank, not the peacekeeper. Just Laurel, a woman who walked out of a lifetime of manipulation and chose herself. A woman who protected her daughter when no one else would. A woman who learned that boundaries are not weapons, they are lifelines. As I stood to go inside, the porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm glow across the wood boards. I paused, taking in the moment. This was what freedom felt like. Not loud, not triumphant, just deeply, quietly right. Before heading to bed, I checked on Riley. She was sleeping soundly, her face relaxed, unburdened. Safe. I whispered, "We're okay now, we really are." And as I closed her door, I knew the truth. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they tried to take. And sometimes the biggest revenge of all is finally living a life where they no longer exist.